Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you. This is my real accent. That's how I talk, and that's how I'm going to talk the rest of the Q&A. Is that cool? Okay, awesome. From New Zealand, and thanks for having me. Do I talk like this? Is this the way I talk?
There's no way I'm capable of doing that. This is why I'm not an actor and I sit here and talk about movies, because I can't do accents and act.
Okay.
You look disappointed.
I'm not disappointed. Anyone can act.
I wanted to ask
Remember words.
Words are good. And
My favourite thing is when people when you're working with people who think we can do an impro take, and they're like, okay, and then they do it and they think improvising is you say the first thing that comes into your head. You go action, they go, cool tall chairs. And turns out everyone is improvising every second of the day on the planet Earth. Every single human being is making it up as they go along. So when people say, great improvising, we're all doing it. Every human being is doing it as soon as they wake up.
the next interview I do, I'm going to walk up on the stage and be like, cool tall chairs, and someone's going to look at me like I have two heads, and I'm going to blame you. Is that cool?
I'll take that.
I want to ask you about the adaptation process here. Curious, with working with source material on Jojo Rabbit compared to Hunt for the Wilder People, was there anything about adapting this particular book that made it more or less challenging for you?
Well, there's a thing with books, you gotta read them. And I had a reaction to books because my mum's a teacher, and so as punishment she would make me read books. So that's how I don't like them anymore. And especially when they're long. And I will open a book, and if the words are too small, hell no. I'm not doing that. I'm 44. I make my own decisions now. If you're writing a book, make that font super big. Put lots of pictures in. And also, tell me the whole story on the back cover. Tell me everything. Because then I'll also people say, what do you think of that book? I went, so good. So great. It's going great. I've insulted actors and writers. And I've encouraged everyone to stop reading books. What? Don't listen to me.
Part of the cool thing about this movie and Caging Skies, the book, is it never was published in the US, and I believe it was first published last year, and I think it probably had something to do with you making a movie about it, right?
Yes.
How did author Christine Lunan feel about you infusing more comedy and satire into her story, which is very different tonally than what we see on screen?
Yeah, the book is a lot darker. There are no jokes, and there's no imaginary friend. But the heart of the story is about this boy who discovers that his mother's hiding this girl in their house, and that's the thing that I really latched onto, and I have zero idea about how to make a drama, a straight drama, and I have zero interest in doing that. I think they're great, and I like watching other people's dramas, but I don't want to turn up to work every day knowing I'm going to be depressed. So I know my style and my sensibility, and I thought, okay, if I'm going to do something like this, I have to infuse it with something that I'm used to doing, and it's not just putting jokes in, but for me it's about injecting it with some humor and a bit of life, and come back, this is going to be better. But the thing is really it's, for me, comedy is one of the greatest tools for fighting bullies and intolerance and hate, and I always tell the story it's a really great story. Stephen Merchant was talking to me about, I'm sure a lot of you know the story about Groucho Marx and his, I think it was his daughter in the 30s. Her and her friends went to a Beverly Hills country club, and she wasn't allowed in the pool because she was Jewish. And at that time, here, they had a no Jews in the pool policy. And instead of reacting as I think as a parent I would react, which would be to go up there and try and knife them, he wrote a letter in the Groucho way and said, to be fair, she's only half Jewish, so would you consider letting her into the pool up to her knees? And for me, that is better than, than being too dramatic and reactionary. For me, using humor to pick apart the ridiculousness of these ideas and these rules, it really focuses everything on how ludicrous these ideas are about picking on someone because of, it's so stupid. And once you start doing that, everything kind of falls apart and you kind of see it for what it is. And that's why I think that satire is fabulous, and I think that humor has always, for me, been a very important method of delivering a deeper message, because humor disarms audiences, makes them relax and open up and listen. And I think if you go into a film knowing from the start that it's going to be harrowing, and that's why there's never been a sequel to Manchester by the Sea.
I wanted to ask you.
Joking, great film.
Just the idea of an adaptation, because obviously
Breaking the Waves 2. Can't wait.
Original stories are wonderful too, but I think there's such great value in reinterpreting something that already exists. So what does an adaptation mean to you, especially having worked on so many?
For me, it's about finding for me, it was finding things that I found interesting. And it's like a filtration process. So I feel like with my writing, I'm adapting my scripts constantly as well. Here's my trick. What I do is I write a first draft, and then I put it away for about 4 years, and then I reread it, and I realized someone completely different must have written this. And so I read it a couple of times, then I throw that away, and then I rewrite it from memory. And what happens is you filter out all the things that meant something to you, or that were important to the story. And what happens is you get rid of all the first draft bullshit, which is, like which is basically you. And, you're like, here's what's important, and what the audience needs to see is that my mum's boyfriend was mean to me. And no one cares that your mum's boyfriend was mean to you. What they care about is the heart of the story, the emotion, like something that the human part of the story. So I rewrite it, and then usually my very long script suddenly becomes 65 pages, and then I add back in the things that I feel are more me, and so kind of adding a little bit more kind of space, and yeah, that's the process.
I've spoken to a lot of writers recently that tell me that as they're writing, the story kind of finds itself. Do you feel that happens when you're writing, when you're working on the story on set, and then also in the edit as well?
Yeah, I mean, filmmaking is a constant journey of compromise and disappointment. And so, right from the start, here's what would make a great movie, and then 2 years later, or in my case with every film I've done, 7 years later, you are just trying to hold on desperately to that one little seed, that one thing that you felt at the beginning. Miraculously, I still like it, but that's all I know how to do now. What was the question?
You're pretty good at it, so you're in good shape. Just the idea of a story kind of emerging or finding itself as you're crafting it during the process.
Yeah. this probably isn't answering your question again, but what I do is I don't quite know the story. I know how I would like people to feel at the end of the film, so usually I write the end first, then the beginning, then a bunch of stuff in the middle. I feel like this will be cool to see. Here's a thing that I rejected from another script, I'll put that in there. I'll change the names. And just get as many sequences with like scenes that I would be proud of, and then desperately figure out a way of gluing them all together. And I'm being very honest, I'm not like, this is how I do it. Like, some people are so good at structure, I'm terrible at it. I'm good at dialogue, but that's I'd say, the structure thing kind of comes in the edit, and I often will shoot too much stuff because I know that I may need it or I may not need it, and so there's a lot of deleted things. And I edit for maybe minimum of 7 months in my films, and I test them all the time. So with this film we tested it about 14 times, and my thing is I love listening to audiences because I want to make films for audiences. So my first couple of attempts at making films or writing was, that was in the days when I was like really trying to be Wong Kar-wai, and it's back when it's like, well, if you don't get it, you're an idiot. But now I realise, if you don't get it, I'm an idiot. So I really listen to the audience a lot, and I try and I engage with them. I say, when were you bored? When did you like it? When did you think your bladder was going to explode and you wanted to go through it? Like, I try and listen, try and not make my films too long or too short, and then I go back and I try new things, try new humour, try new things, and then just keep going until they pry it out of my cold dead hands. And like what we did in the Shadows, this mockumentary about vampires that we did a few years ago, I think we tested, the 6 people we saw it. I think we tested it about maybe, I don't know, felt like 20 times. And it was in Wellington in New Zealand, and the population is so small that we ran out of people to test it. The very last screening, the very last test audience was one person, and it was in my lounge room in Wellington, and he was in the movie. And it was just Jermaine and I looking at him as he was watching the movie. And we took it to Sundance, and we were supposed to sell it at the premiere at Sundance. And then halfway through the film, Jermaine goes, well, we've got a lot of work to do. And the film was finished. And then on stage, we were like trying to talk about how great the film was. Jermaine says in front of all the buyers, he goes, yeah, well, it's not finished, so we're going to probably go home and work on it some more, so yeah, we're not happy with it yet. And everyone's like, what are you saying? And we did. We went back to New Zealand, shot more stuff, and we really blew that. But at least the film's better.
You made a special one, and it spawned a great TV series too, if you guys haven't checked it out. Jumping off of that, I don't even know if you can answer that after explaining that process, but how do you know when this movie is finished? Is it a constant like moving goal line, or do you ever get that feeling, yep, I watched it now and this is good?
I think, the sad thing is that you have an idea about the perfect film that you want to see, and by the end of it, it's the last thing you want to watch. And that's sort of like, I don't watch any of my, I don't go to the premieres and watch my films. As soon as it's taken away from the grade and the soundmix, I give up. So I feel like I did my best and I tried my hardest, and I won't let it go until I feel that I'm in love with it again. And then and the edit for me is a big process. It really is a love affair, but with like your kid. And the parents out there, you know what it's like. Some days you love them, some days you like. But so for me, a lot of the time, here's how I know that I think I'm in love with my film again, is when I can stay awake. I go into the edit and I have I'm sure it's a condition. If I get super stressed, I just fall asleep. I can't help it, and I will do that. I do it on set all the time. That's why I have a couch now. I asked for a couch, and the monitors are there, and I'll lie on the couch and I look at the monitors because I want to see it how everyone else in the world is going to see it, just on the couch. And I watch it, and I feel, and then in the edit, I watch the first assembly, and it's like that saying the saying goes, the film is never as good as the dailies because you think you're a genius, and it's never as terrible as the first assembly. And you just, it's just a process of wanting to make this film something that you're proud of again. And it's, for me, I just sleep all the time. And when I feel like I'm awake and engaged, I feel like, okay, this is now something that I would watch, which means other people might watch it.
Watched it too many times, more times than I can count. We are going to go to some audience questions, so start thinking of that. Oh, we've got them already. I saw you first.
First of all, just want to say thank you for making such an amazing movie that is both hilarious, beautiful, but heartbreaking and thought-provoking at exactly the same time. I admire everything that you've put into it, but most of all, your creativity behind and on the camera. And I'm just wondering, as an aspiring actor, how do you keep your creative juices flowing? Because it just seems you go from project to project, and it just keeps coming and coming, and you're spinning this endless wheel of gold.
So for me, my biggest fear, apart from falling asleep, my biggest fear is making something that feels very safe and very and not true to myself. And luckily for me, I didn't make my first film until I was 30, and so I had a lot of life experiences before that. My background was painting, so I was like, I was just trying to be a painter for many, many years, and I started. What are you laughing at? You must be a painter, you know. And so, but for me, coming into it, I felt very lucky that every film I made, my first 4 films were made in New Zealand, and I would come here and they would give me scripts, really bad ones, and it just encouraged me to keep going back to New Zealand and doing my thing, where there's a lot more freedom and creative control, and because I only work with my friends who were very judgmental, that I was very scared of playing it safe around them. And now that I sort of know my voice and how I want to do things, I don't care anymore, and I don't care about annoying people or sort of addressing the notes so much. And it's not I come from New Zealand. We're not arrogant. We're just polite. Okay, so I will politely deny doing those notes. But for me, it's about making it playful and creating a space where people, I invite anyone on set to give me ideas, because ultimately I will take credit for it. And everyone on set is just an extension of my brain. So that's and being a auteur, don't ever use that word. But it feels like, for me, it's close to being happy. It's close to finding that happiness that I had when I was a young person, as a slightly older, but still very youthful looking.
I've read that a lot about you, that the folks you work with think that you create an atmosphere on set where anybody on the crew can feel comfortable coming up and making a suggestion. What is the key to making sure everybody has that feeling? Because, sometimes, the man in charge, the director, can be intimidating. So what do you do at the beginning to establish that kind of environment?
Well, I don't like silence on sets. It really freaks me out. And I've visited other sets where you can hear a pin drop, and it's like, I think some people really revel in that, making everyone uncomfortable, and you're waiting, hang on every word from the director. I will just straight up say, dudes, I have no idea what we're doing. And I'm lost. I'm really lost. Someone help me. Let's play some music. Let's have a little dance, and then we'll figure it out. And it just sort of, it's for me. We're so lucky to have this job or to be doing anything in this industry. And so when I go to work and people are grumpy about pretending to be people, what is wrong with you? You know that one day they're going to find out what we do. Someone's going to discover that we have been faking this and calling it a job like this long. So enjoy it while it lasts. This window is only open for such a minuscule amount of time, and I know that from my shitty jobs before I did this. So I know what I could go back to, and so I always every single day when I go to work, I'm so excited, really happy, and I just want other people to be happy. And I try my hardest not to hire people or work with people who bring ego or this sort of, especially people who have done a lot of stuff and kind of patronize you or sort of make you feel or belittle you or undermine what ideas you have, because they're like, yeah, but when we were doing the Cotton Club, that wasn't how it worked. Great, and that's cool. I really appreciate all the stuff, all the people who went before us and everyone's experiences, but this is a particular type of film that I do, and I just only want to work with nice people.
You could feel it when you walked over. I got you right in the middle there. I don't need that. Thank you, Taika.
What?
Wait, yeah, right in the middle there.
Thank you for being here. I love this movie so much. Can you talk about the way you use color in the movie? There were so many primary colors, and I was just curious about why you picked green for Inga's room and the front door of the home.
There's questions about color in the film. We filmed in Prague. Originally, we were going to shoot in Berlin at Studio Babelsberg, which is sort of the place to go for these films. But it turns out Germany's really done some work on their workers' rights laws, and so with kids you can only shoot with them for 3 hours a day. So the schedule was going to be 90 days or something. It was going to be crazy, and we couldn't afford that. So we thought, well, let's go to the Eastern Bloc countries. Pretty sure it's going to be a lot looser out there. Turns out it wasn't. You could only shoot with a kid for 5 hours a day. Interestingly, in New Zealand, if you guys come to New Zealand, you can work a kid for 10 hours. It's paradise. That's why they call it paradise. That's true. So we went to Prague and we shot at Barrendorf Studios. Another fun fact: those studios were built by the Nazis to make all their propaganda films, and so it's a very weird residue, that's sort of hanging around that place, and it just felt like a weird place to shoot. And there's also 2 other World War II films going on, so you're walking down the hall and it's some Nazi soldiers walking in, are those our Nazis? So it's all really, really weird. But when we went in there, we said, look, what costumes have you got in your archives? And everything they brought out was brown and grey, and just torn trench coats and stuff. And I get it, because a certain tone, you've got to bring it down. And I think some people think that we went over the top with colour, but in reality, if you research what was happening in Germany at the very end of the war, and also throughout the war, Germany were pulling in textiles and design and fashion from all over the place, and they really considered themselves right at the top at that time. So all of those clothes that Scarlett's wearing and everything are their period costumes from that time in Germany. And what was happening is because they knew that the Russians were coming, and they knew that tomorrow might be the last day that they would survive. So people were partying like crazy. They were all on drugs. You should read a book called Blitzed about drugs in Germany. Basically, they invented meth. That's where the Blitzkrieg comes from. And so the entire country were off their faces, and because they thought that they were going to die today or tomorrow, they put on all of their makeup, all their best clothes. They just dressed to kill. They were like, we are going to be wasted and look glamorous when everyone comes to kill us. So it was like a really weird time when everyone was just such a strange time. And also the colors and the architecture and everything, it's very colorful, and you never really see that in films. And I just like the idea of seeing like the end of the party when it was like splashes of color everywhere, but beneath that facade, you know that everything was crumbling. So we made a real effort to research what things look like, and it was, yeah, I mean, it felt a little risky, just, you know, because every room in the house was like so bold and crazy wallpaper and everything, but that was a real effort to sort of show what it was really like in civilian life, I guess.
You bring up Scarlett, and of course we have to talk about her incredible performance in the film, and definitely a big round of applause for that. One of my absolute favorite scenes in it is the dinner scene where she goes on, I mean, one heck of an emotional roller coaster throughout the course of that scene. So how do you kind of prime her to jump into something that heavy and challenging like that?
Well, I like to think with all those characters, it's, you know, you don't want to be, I mean, with her, I think you do, you know, want to empathize, you know, because really, like, the film is a bit of a love letter to single mothers. My mother, who our family escaped the pogroms in Russia in like very early 1900s, and ended up, of all places, in New Zealand. And so my mother was one who introduced me to the book that I adapted, and she was a great single mother who, you know, so I think that Scarlett's character really is like a mix of my mother and Ellen Burstyn in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, who's another great single mother on screen. And I just love the clownish nature of this woman who, you know, who knows the difference between right and wrong, but in those times, it was very dangerous for people like that, because these kids were so indoctrinated and they were taught to rebel and disobey their parents, and they were told right from an early age, if your parents say anything against the party, tell us and we'll take care of them. So, you know, she would be well aware that if, you know, she had just set her son down and said, this is wrong, you know, depending on how kind of brainwashed they were, they could just go off and say, my mum has said something about you guys, and she'd be gone. So it's a very delicate line that she had to walk, and I love the idea of someone who was trying her hardest to shield this kid and protect him from all of the stuff that was going on, and the only way I guess she could do it was through entertainment and try and encourage him to dance and be a kid again. And with that particular scene, for me, it was a mixture of that, but also her frustration, I think, with her husband, who, I think she felt abandoned, and it would have been very hard for her, and also a very tough thing to want to do the right thing and know that, you know, right around the corner was, you know, her demise was waiting. And so yeah, I think it's sort of, and with all those characters, I wanted them to, you know, to feel like there was something before the war, that they had a life before the war, and they had a life that they would rather be living while the war was happening. Like Rockwell's character, I like to think that he was at the club in Cabaret, you know, before the war started, and that was his life that, you know, he wanted to go back to. Elsa, it was important to us to not present her as just a victim, even though, you know, she was victimized and she was in a very delicate and intense situation. For us, it was important to realize that she was a good-looking young girl, 17-year-old girl. At school, she was probably in, you know, the cool group, and may have not even been a particularly nice person at school. And so she did her research, as anyone would. I'm sure you can imagine what the research she did. But I also asked her to watch Heathers because I thought that it was important to me that she understood what it's like for a teenager who's cool and good looking to suddenly be stuck in an attic and how frustrating that would be. And it gives her permission to be a bully and to manipulate this 10-year-old enemy.
Oh boy, have it right up front here.
Hi. So, my question is, first of all, I loved the movie. It was really great. And second, my question is, how was it like first directing the children and also working with them, like in both ways?
Questions about directing and working with the children. They say don't do it. Sometimes I felt they were right. But I've done it a lot now. I work with kids, and I find that there's something, especially most of the kids I've worked with have never done it, have never acted before. And there's a sort of authenticity and a truth to how they do things, which I think eclipses a lot of the baggage that grown-up actors bring to a role. A kid really is just concerned with remembering the lines and not going to school. And adults will come in and be like, I had a thought that my character loves trees, so maybe I should do, I thought about doing the scene in that tree over there. And so you spend half an hour convincing them not to do it in the tree. And whereas young people will come in and they will just I try and cast kids who resemble the character as closely as possible, so at the end of the film, when you see Roman on the street dancing, that really is him. He's a very sensitive kid who cares deeply about human beings, and he just loves people, and he's very, very caring. And so it was more about reverse engineering like that character. So we knew we're going to end with him as he is, and all we have to do really is sort of drape this kind of crappy indoctrinated thing over the top of him, and then try and shed that throughout the film. I love working with kids just because what you get from them is very honest, and that's part of the reason I tried to make this film, is because I wanted to see the perspective of war through the lens of the child, because they sort of, yes, they can be confused, but ultimately they're the best truth tellers.
All right, let's go for you on the aisle right there.
First, Tenokwe, thank you for making such a beautiful movie that it's the first time I've ever been crying of sadness and then laughing out loud at the same time. It's a weird experience. The question
It's
I have
just
is,
normal life. Every day we cry and laugh at the same time. It's never a drama. It was never just a comedy.
the question I have is, it's been 15 years since you were last nominated for an Oscar. What do you feel is the most important thing you've learned in that time span, and what would you tell yourself back then, who also fell asleep at the Oscars?
Yeah. I remember. Did you guys hear it? No. It was talking about I was nominated for a short film Oscar in 2005, and I fell asleep. I pretended to. I asked all the other nominees, I thought, wouldn't it be funny, because they had a camera going down the aisle showing all the nominees. I thought, I heard this is really boring. We should pretend we're asleep. And they were like, that's a great idea, hilarious. None of them did it except me. I was just vilified by it should have been in New Zealand at the time. They were just so outraged. But so what I would tell myself, what I've learned since then, don't do that. Get used to losing, and eat before you go. It's a really lovely honor. I don't know. I don't think anyone really makes a film thinking, I'm only going to do this because I could get a little bit of a nod. That's lunacy to try to make a film just for that. But it is. I I come from a country where we're very humble. We do not like talking about ourselves in like a positive way. And so I'm learning here in this country. Just do this all the time. Because I just work on the confidence. But it is, I'm learning to own those nice things that happen to you.
Many nice things, more to come, and you deserve it. We have so many more. Have it in the red right there.
Thanks very much for your film. But everybody said made me cry really hard and laugh really hard. So I was actually wondering if you had a film or an actor, an artist that influenced you, that you remember to make the stories that you want to make. You know, someone that really touched you, or a film that's special, that kind of influences what you do today.
This is about the films that have influenced me. There are a few, but one in particular is Spirit of the Beehive, which, hands up, who's seen that?
Hey, we got one. 2, 3.
Yeah, 4. A couple of you guys, yeah. Brilliant Spanish film. And that one's very, I think, okay, well, let's put it this way. The films I've ripped off in my career, Spirit of the Beehive, The Graduate, and Badlands. And those are probably the ones that I've felt like I wish I had made. The rest of them I've sort of taken little bits, or maybe something that felt like a shot. With this film, I didn't revisit any World War II films. I didn't revisit the producers or even Chaplin. I'd seen all of them, but it was important for me to try and make this film my own and not to go back and go, how did they do that? Because I felt like I should try and learn how to do it myself. Because I think the inspiration was the fact that they had done it before me, and that there were people who were brave enough to make films like that, and just knowing that, I was kind of in good company with that was enough for me to feel like I could keep going with this.
All right, let's get one more in. I'm so sorry, I hate to pick the last one. Let's go back there. I think we have another one in a red shirt. Yes, I'm pointing at you.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for that and for making us all laugh for an hour and a half. My question was, what's the process of prep for you, and when you're on set, when you're doing scenes that you have to be in yourself?
The question is about prep and being in scenes that I have to be in myself, being in directing scenes that I'm in. The prep, it depends on the film. With the Marvel films, you do a lot of prep, and a lot very, very planned. But I'm not really into plans. So I don't storyboard my films usually. I have a sort of an idea of what I could fall back on, but I really like to kind of find it when I get there, because I feel like there's so many things that you can discover. So when I work, like for instance, the art department and costume, I told everyone to bring everything they have, and so I have all the wardrobe basically on set.